and talk about the Cincinnati Bengals, the reason Chris is with us today. Continuing the 9-8 run, 9-8 last year. Zach Taylor still the head coach, still calling the play, so it's going to be the same offense. However, their coordinator moved over to Tennessee, so Dan Pitcher, the former QB coach, moves up to offensive coordinator. Joe Burrow is the quarterback, going off the board as the QB8 right now. Jake Browning backing him up. Zack Moss comes over to be the starting running back. Chase Brown is the RB2. Travion Williams, the 3. Chris Evans, the 4. Jamar Chase is obviously the wide receiver 1. T. Higgins did sign his franchise tag. He is going to play football in 2024. The question is it with the Bengals? Right now, going off the board is the wide receiver 27. Jermaine Burton, the rookie, as the wide receiver 3. Andre Yoshivas as the wide receiver 4. Trenton Irwin as the wide receiver 5. Mike Gesicki comes over to be the tight end. And Drew Sample is still there as the backup tight end. So you guys are good. Me and Chris want to talk about the wide receivers. So, Josh, I'm going to let you get us started one more time. Talk about Zack Moss, a player that I don't think a lot of people are super interested in, but did some decent things for the Indianapolis Colts last year.
Yeah, it's really weird because I have plenty of Zack Moss shares in Dynasty, and I can't get rid of him fast enough. It's not because I don't necessarily believe in Zack Moss. Like, we kind of talked about this a little bit last week with Zamir White. Like, there's a path to volume. With Zack Moss, I'm not 100% sure there is a path to volume because while he's an okay pass catcher and an okay pass blocker, he doesn't have the juice in the passing game that Chase Brown does. But my biggest issue when you're looking at the level of ADP with Zack Moss in comparison to Chase Brown, like the common sense is, well, Chase Brown's going later, so he's a better value, right? Well, look at the types of running backs they are, the types of workload and the types of usage they have. Tell me how much more valuable Chase Brown is in his little circle of valuable assets around him in comparison to Zack Moss. I actually would prefer Zack Moss at value. He had basically career highs across the board last year, but also had his second lowest yards per carry of his entire career. Yes, I understand it's only 4 years, but 4.3 yards is okay. It's not great. But we've also seen this offense be completely inefficient on the ground. Like, Joe Mixon had 4 yards per carry season in the last 3 years. This is also a very low volume rushing attack. They have not crossed 400 total rush attempts the past 2 seasons. Zach Taylor only wants to throw the football.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at it from that perspective, Chase Brown is the one that you want because he's likely going to be the back that's on the field catching passes. But there's plenty of red zone work that I think can still keep Zack Moss propped up and still kind of keep him in that like RB2 range. But if you told me by the end of the season that he was an RB3, it would not shock me at all.
Chris, Josh brought up a point that I wanted to ask you about as someone who follows Cincinnati closer than at least the two of us. Is the yards per carry a Joe Mixon issue, or is it they have built their entire offensive line around pass blocking, and maybe they're just not that good at run blocking? Because we've seen a more efficient Joe Mixon, but obviously he's getting up there. But over the last 3 years, he has certainly barely hit that 4-yard mark, whereas Zack Moss is routinely over that 4-yard mark. Should we see a dip out of Zack Moss because of who the Bengals are, their team identity?
So with all things, I mean, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So the part about Joe Mixon and it's like being partly him. Yes, part of it. The blocking scheme that he came out of when he was still at Oklahoma, right? Still in college and then transitioning like into the league and then working with Cincinnati, vastly different. So like just him having to adjust that scheme, that's just not the way that he's particularly played. And so we saw that kind of bear out and like having to adjust because the Bengals just like they use duo for a lot of their running plays just a ton. Cause that's just for, especially last year when Burrow came in with the busted calf, didn't really have much time to install anything different or like additional concepts like into the offense. So them having to integrate their running game with their passing game was just already set like behind schedule. Like They had so many things that they needed to do from a pass game standpoint. They're just like, well, we'll just figure it out in the running game. And that's what we see kind of bear out in the stats. But also to your point, the blocking portion of it, yes, that is like also like a part of like one of their bugaboos in terms of, yeah, we need to make sure that Joe Burrow stays upright. I mean, that's the reason why they lost the freaking Super Bowl. Like,
it's the team motto at this point. I'm pretty sure.
I'm not upset
Joe
about
Burrow
it.
upright.
I'm not upset that they lost because whatever. Man, I still remember
It's
I'm sitting in a
infuriating.
bar, like I'm sitting in a bar in Cincinnati when they were at the playing in the Super Bowl, and I was like, I think they can do it. I think they can do it.
Yeah.
And they were driving, and then he got the sack, and that was like on a play like where Jamar Chase was just streaking down the field because the quarterback had fallen down.
Yep.
But when you have just an alien playing defensive tackle on the opposite side, I guess I can understand. And then you have turnstiles for offensive linemen. I can understand that. But yeah, Frank Pollock, their offensive line coach, has been more, I guess not to say he's been more focused on their pass blocking than their run blocking, but that's just been their thing because that has been their team identity. So I think it has been a bit of both. Zack Moss, the blocking scheme that they were using in Indianapolis does favor a bit more of what they're doing in Cincinnati now. So stylistically, Moss coming over actually does make a ton of sense. And for honestly, like for how much they wound up paying him, I'm like, good move, Cincinnati, like, keeping it cheap, like from a backfield standpoint. But the other wrinkle, and I saw this posted by Adam Levitan, who was taking excerpts out of The Athletic. This was a couple of days ago. The suggestion that the Denver Broncos, once they most likely wind up cutting Samaje Perine here within the next month or so.
What a good point.
And bringing him back, because it's not just about the fact that whether or not what Zack Moss and Chase Brown can offer as both runners and or receivers. It's also what you can do as a pass blocker. And that was a huge thing that the Bengals lost. Like once you get into like third down and like obvious passing situations, I mean, having Joe Mixon out there was something of a liability. Like that's why Joe Mixon over the back end of the season, when they wound up going to the Super Bowl, he wound up losing that job to Samaje Perine because Perine is the superior pass blocker. So I'm kind of looking at it like Zack Moss, he gets the early down work is essentially his job to lose as the starter. But then afterwards, when it comes to like needing a guy that's out there to protect number 9, like when they have to throw it, when it's 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, if Samaje Perine gets back on that team on just a vet minimum type of deal because he gets cut from the Broncos, Chase Brown, like that goes right out the window. Like after that.
Yeah, if you are holding Chase Brown in Dynasty right now, you might want to move him
because it's not going to look good.
No. Yeah, and looking at Chase Brown's ADP, to me, it's just
it never made sense.
It way too high.
It's too high. It never made sense.
He's like really, a 13th, 14th round guy for me. Like I don't.
And it was one wheel route. It was like one play.
It
was
one game, like 3 catches, 100 and something yards, and now everybody's
don't
like,
get me wrong. Like I was
I
was hopping up and down in my living room, like just like Chase Brown. Yeah, we got a good like back, RB2 on the team and all this other stuff. But now you want to make me pay like a 12th round cost? Like get out of here. All that. Like I'm not
Chase Brown going to the school of Jadeveon Clowney on getting paid off of one play.
No, like we're not doing this. Like, no, man, I can't do it.
All right, Chris, what are you going to tell the world that they don't know about wide receiver 3, Jamar Chase? Is it that he might be 2 spots too low? How do you feel about that?
All right. So, all right. How else do I pose this question? How good is Jamar Chase? Is Jamar Chase really that dude? I say this like with Bengals, like with my Bengals skepticism.
Interesting, because that's my take on T. Higgins.
Because, well, see that that's a whole other conversation. We'll get to that. So Rich Rebar over at Sharp Football. I mean, excellent analyst, excellent person, awesome hang. But he put out like last year was his first time. This was with Joe Burrow healthy, was like the first time that his targets behind the line of scrimmage was north of 20%. They were around like 9-10% just this past season. His usage on screens was up. His targets from out of the slot were also up as well. So I mean, we've put Jamar Chase like in this echelon of receivers, right? Like you just said, Ryan, he's going as the wide receiver 3. I mean, he's been up there since he came into the league. He's been up there with the Justin Jeffersons, the Tyreek Hills, the CeeDee Lambs, and all of that. But he plays the game differently, like than each of those guys. So I'm not questioning like how good of a player like Ja'Marr Chase is from a yards after the catch per reception, yards per route run just north of 2 just this past season, which is good, not great, but given the way that the team functioned last year, I can kind of see it. But his inability to really like beat a lot of like press coverage, they have had to like shift him around the formation, actually move him inside a lot. And we saw some of that bear out like just last year. It makes me wonder about like what his, like he might be great for fantasy because he's still going to be the alpha of like for the Bengals and all that. But where he sits in the echelon of actual like, legitimate wide receivers, I don't know if he's at the same caliber of wide receiver as the rest of the guys that he's being drafted around. That's where I'm at. But but right now, 1,300 yards, I think is where he's sitting at. I'll take the under. I think right now, I think our projections
are enormous.
Yeah, I think that's
where.
I
mean, he had 12-16 last year.
Right.
And
so it's like
14-55 his rookie year.
Right. So with Burrow being healthy, him being healthy, right, because he fell on his ass in the middle of the game and wound up missing the game after, busted his shoulder against the Vikings. So like full 18 game or 17 game season, sure, he could probably get there. But if we do expect like T. Higgins to be back, if we do expect at least some sort of usage out of Jermaine Burton and or Mike Gesicki, 1,300, that might be a little bit of a stretch. So I'm taking the under on him.
So let me ask you this, Chris, because you bring up like, 20% of the targets were behind the line of scrimmage. How much of that do you think is more geared towards the fact that Cincinnati's offensive line feels like it's been a bottom 5 unit basically since Joe Burrow got into the league, no matter how much money they throw at different offensive linemen, and the fact that he was dealing with that calf injury to start the year, and then when he gets hurt, you're dealing with Jake Browning, who's done next to nothing in the NFL, and that they're just trying to get the ball in the hands of their best playmaker.
Definitely a bit of both in that regard. But I would say though that, I mean, who is it? Well, I wouldn't say that any of the other like wide receivers have dealt with the same thing. Like CeeDee Lamb, who's like typically operated out of the slot, but has been moved out to the Z position, like has also fared been pretty well. But Dallas has a better offensive line. So I think your point is well taken, Josh, that the way that they've constructed their offensive line and also the fact that Joe Burrow was hurt could have necessitated like some of that. So the hope is that maybe they do find some sort of sweet spot where we do get to see Ja'Marr Chase like be the guy that we thought like that he was in his rookie season, where he did actually play a bit more outside. He was that guy like that was facing like a team star corner. And he got, I mean, he had the rookie record for receiving yards until, his buddy from LSU came in and completely shot that out of the sky like the year after that. And then Puka Nacua came along like shortly thereafter. But it's like, can he be that guy? And but I think all of that stuff has to come together. Joe Burrow has to be healthy. Offensive line still has to be operating. And then of course he also has to be healthy as well for us to really see him be that wide receiver one that I think he can be. But I just think the way that the offense has been constructed and the injuries has kind of kept us from really seeing Ja'Marr Chase be Ja'Marr Chase.
I think the biggest thing though, I don't think Zach Taylor's all that good of a play caller. I
think
we're looking at him from this like McVay Shanahan tree that we think that the offense is just going to be exactly the same. And because they have someone like Ja'Marr Chase that, he can look like a Justin Jefferson. He can look like, a Cooper Kupp or a Puka Nacua. He can look like, how efficient Brandon Ayuk was last year, right? Zach Taylor's play calling is not near as good. I personally think he's a decent head coach. I think he just needs to revert to just being a CEO and figure out like a succession plan as a play caller, because I don't think Zach Taylor's it.
No, he's not. I think he's okay. And I think there were some indications over the offseason that he might take something of a step back. I might be misremembering that, but I think he's okay when it comes to play sequencing, like when they're in game, but in terms of game planning. And like we were talking earlier about the fact that they take how many like it's been almost like 3 years in a row where the Bengals will start off and their offense will just like shit. It's just like a complete mismatch between like the passing game will look great. It's Joe Burrow doing well. It's Jamar, it's Tyler Boyd, but then Joe Mixon sucks. But then like 2 months later, it takes them, 8 games and some really stupid losses for everything to start to click. And it's like, oh, that game against when they played against the 49ers, it's like, I remember this Bengals team. Like, where was this at almost 2 months ago? Right. And I think that's the problem that I've continually had with Zack Taylor, where it takes him and the rest of the coaching staff so long in order to figure out what's going on with the offense, where with some of the better with the other contenders in the AFC, I'll just even stick with the AFC, they just seem to know right off the bat, oh, this isn't working, we'll do this.
Well, and also
like all this stuff is not working with like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Oh, we'll do this orbital motion type of thing, and like we'll get this stuff to like like I don't know, Mike McDaniel goes off and like smokes a bunch of weed and comes back. Oh, I can figure out how to do this stuff like real quick. Yeah.
Well, and also what has always bugged me about the Bengals, and it's gotten better, but I think it was 2021. It may have been 2022. But there was a point in the season where the Bengals were running the fewest plays in the NFL. How with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins are you running the fewest plays in the NFL? And each over the last 2 years, they've run 59 plays per game, which is like middle to low. Like we want to see this team at 64, 65, 66 plays per game with this quarterback. And it just seems like Taylor is hesitant to do that. But you brought up an interesting point for someone who doesn't follow the Bengals as closely about what they've had to do to make Jamar Chase more effective. And I wonder if that might be why I hate T. Higgins, because I wonder if T. Higgins is just kind of stuck as kind of the wide receiver too. Because what really took me aback when I looked at T. Higgins, Chris, was 75 catches for 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. You might as well pin that at the end of his name, because that's what he does every single year. And it's interesting because he misses games and he still puts up that stat line, or he plays all the games and still puts up that stat line. It doesn't get better. It doesn't get worse. The issue for me, Chris, is that's 211 fantasy points. That's never going to be better than the wide receiver 20. Right now for fantasy, it feels like T. Higgins is priced right. Are you worried then if they were to move T. Higgins because of this contract dispute? Does that take away their ability to free up Jamar Chase?
No, because I think at least we saw, like, especially when Higgins was down like last year, they were still doing enough of that. We'll move Chase inside. We'll do this other stuff. We'll put them on these bubble screens. We'll do like they had all these machinations in order to get Chase like out in open space and still get him the ball when they needed to. I just think that they've had poor succession plan, or at least poor development plan for T, because once they drafted Chase, it was like, we're just going to focus on Chase and Burrow. Like, we want the LSU Tigers back, and so we're just going to focus on them, and then T's going to be off like doing his own thing. But behind both of them, like you mentioned them earlier, it's like they've got Yoshivas, they've got Trenton Irwin. I mean, they've had these tight ends that have been like okay here and there, Tanner Hudson, like Drew Sample and all that. But like outside of like the primary duo of Chase and Higgins.
Oh, Chris, you just went mute. I don't know if your mic disconnected or. Nope, still muted. Can I unmute you? Let's see what happens.
Oh, you definitely.
There we go.
There it is.
Okay. But either way, like they haven't been able to really develop anybody behind either of those two guys.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think that's the part that really concerns me about T, because it's like, if they already know he's likely going to be gone, let's say he plays out the 2024 season, he's gone in 2025, which is probably what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Do you see Andre Yosivas like start to get more involved? They drafted Jermaine Burton. He was making a lot of headway, making some headlines like during OTAs. Does he start to take a bit more away from Higgins? Mike Gesicki. We'll see if he finally does the 7th year breakout like for Mike. Maybe like at some point.
I'm so tired of people hyping up Bengals tight ends. It's just not it.
I say that's Josh means he's tired of me. Let's be clear. Josh means he's tired of me.
Well, this could, like, honestly, if there was a year for it to happen, considering they don't have a wide receiver 3, this would be the year for that to happen.
When Gesicki was a free agent before he went to New England, I was like, he's going to the Bengals. It's going to work. And then he went to New England and it didn't work. And now a year later ends up with Cincinnati. I'm like, it's going to work.
To me, it has a better chance of working this year because Tyler Boyd isn't there.
Right. Yeah, and that's my only point. Is like where it could work is you just want a big body out there running routes to like, so if T's off doing his thing, Jamar Chase is getting like cloud coverage. You want a third dude that can actually operate in the middle of the field. all right, Mike Gesicki can do that. If it's 3rd and 6 and you've got both of your guys covered and you need a dude that just gets you a first down, get you a bucket, Mike Gesicki can do that. And I think that could be how they see him being used in 2024. Might not be useful for fantasy unless it's in the red zone, but at the very least I can see that's how he gets deployed. So he might have some fantasy relevance for this season.
All right, and then let's wrap these up with the best bets. Joe Burrow to lead the NFL in passing yards. Not as good of odds as what Josh found on Trevor Lawrence at plus 1,100 on FanDuel, but Josh does like Jamar Chase to lead the NFL in receiving yards. Rather, rushing yards would be fucking insane.
That'd be wild.
Receiving yards at plus 1,400. So, Chris, to end this show, I'm going to put you on the spot. Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence, knowing that Trevor Lawrence has double the payout, plus 1,100 for Burrow, plus 2,200 on Trevor Lawrence. Who has the better chance to lead the NFL in passing yards, or are we both just wasting our money?
No, it's Joe Burrow.
Right.
It has to be Joe Burrow. Pass rate over expectation. They were still number 1 in early down passing last season. That was even after like Joe Burrow went down. So even if it was like a dink and dunk type of offense with Jake Browning, we know how Zach Taylor wants to call plays. And if we can assume the health of the triumvirate of Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, I think Burrow has like the strongest path to leading the league in that area.
Yeah, that's what I put in my notes is they threw for 4,200 last year with, 8 games from what's that?
Yeah. With Jake Browning mostly.
Yeah, with Jake Browning.
Right, with Jake Browning for most
4,600
of it,
led the league. The only concern with me on this is Joe Burrow has thrown for 4611 in 2021. But this is the first year in a long time where 5,000 wasn't needed to lead the NFL in passing. So it's still a fun bet at plus 1,100. I'm not mad at the Trevor Lawrence at plus 2,200 either, Josh. So,
I like the plus 1,100 though. I do, because literally, as I mentioned when I was talking about Zack Moss, this team doesn't run the football. Less than 400 carries the last 2 seasons.
Yep.
What does that tell you? They're going to throw the damn football.
Especially once they get into the red zone too. I mean, top 5 in red zone.
Just imagine if Jamar Chase gets back up to that rookie year status where he's, above 15 yards per reception. He hits that 18 yards per reception mark.
Yeah.
Joe Burrow could very easily hit 5,000 yards.
MVP.
MVP.